Through an examination of queerness, race, and the power that they play within the lives of a Southern Black family, Jennifer Neal's Notes on Her Color is an inventive and vibrant story as mother and daughter share the ability to change the color of their skin. Gabrielle and her mother have a uniquely close relationship, but the opposite is true with her temperamental father. The patriarch's only desire is that their skin must remain white at all times while in his presence. Neal talks about reaching into satirical storylines and historical moments that feel satirical, that became the inspirational foundation of her debut novel. She also talked about her hope that her work adds to the many stories of queer narratives and spaces that seek to erase them. Stay with us for another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. Are you currently looking for a bookstore that has a great selection of books? Well, Kizzy's Books and More is that bookstore. Visit www.kizzy'sbooksandmore.com to purchase your next book for our book club. Use coupon code VulgarGenius to receive 10% off the subtotal of your first order. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. We are your hosts.
My name is Denny.
And I am Veronica. And today we are joined with our fiction writer for the month of June, Jennifer Neal. Jennifer is an American-Australian author, artist, and occasional stand-up comedian. She has written for NPR, Playboy, Gay Magazine, The Cut, The Root, and many other publications. She now lives in Berlin for now, where she works as a freelance producer and translator. Her book, Notes on Her Color, has debuted here in the US last month, and I believe yesterday in Germany. Is that correct?
Well, yesterday was the German celebration, so yes, you could call that a kind of debut.
Okay, so it is out and about and walking around for everybody to go and drop some dollars on. Go buy this book. It is truly a phenomenal read, and we're so excited to speak with Jennifer today. So I'm going to pass it off to Jenny, and she's going to take it over from here.
Yeah, Jennifer listened to one of her episodes, so she knows what's coming up. She knows that we're going to be asking her some, questions about some stuff that, maybe the readers would like to know about her. What has been the wildest place you've been to and why, except for, Florida? That's a whole different conversation.
Well, I love that you had to add that qualifier because naturally that would probably be at the very top of my list. The wildest place I've ever been. Maybe, oh goodness. It could be here in Berlin, to be honest. I was gonna say Australia, but then I thought Australia is basically if Florida were an entire continent, so it basically just kind of cancels it out. I would think Berlin because I have never encountered more contradictory behaviors in a place than I have here. Like, you have the whole German efficiency phenomenon that is probably more of a part of its international reputation. And maybe that exists. I have not seen it since I've lived here. What I have seen are people who take themselves very, very seriously from Monday morning until Friday afternoon, and then they go absolutely ham on the drugs and the partying over the weekends. And then the Christianity on Sunday afternoons, and then they go straight back to it on Monday mornings. So
you gotta ask for repentance, right? For what you did on the
weekend. Forgive me, Father, if I have sinned repeatedly. That's pretty much how it goes here. And also just the experiences I've had here have been the wildest I've ever had anywhere. And just the level of exposure to things that you can get here, the absolute lawlessness of this place. It's really a place for lost people and lost souls and lost minds to kind of be lost together. So that gives you a kind of taste of what I'm talking about.
Does that rule, the Monday through Friday, apply when it's Pride?
For me, no. For everybody I know, absolutely not. But then again, all of my people, we're like freelancers, we're artists. We kind of like make our own schedules. And overall, I would say that Berlin is very different from the rest of Germany in that pride here is a big deal. Outside of the city, it's very conservative and very Christian. So yeah, I would say that still applies during Pride outside of Berlin.
Noted. Noted.
Yeah.
With regards to like, we all like to eat at some point. We all have our favorite food. What do you make whenever you miss home? And where is home? What is home?
Because you've been everywhere around the world. So
Well, I just got back from the United States last week actually, and I brought with me my entire suitcase was filled with spices. Spices, seasonings, like things I could never get here, like hot honey, truffle infused chili crisp, truffle infused hot sauce. So when I miss home, or when I miss the United States, should I say, I'm not sure if it feels like home anymore. I make the spiciest, most flavorsome thing ever. I have an entire vat of lemon pepper seasoning right now that I like smuggled in from Atlanta. And I also got this blue agave sriracha hot sauce from Brooklyn because, of course, you'll find that in Brooklyn.
Yes.
I go through periods of wanting to make slow cooked barbecue, which I think is probably more of an attestament to like my Southern roots. Like that just feels like comfort to me. It feels like being wrapped in a warm embrace and a warm blanket. But also, I mean, I know Juneteenth has already come and gone, but fried chicken and watermelon. It's just an elite combination. It's delicious, and I will not be judged for it by anybody.
Yes. No
and
judgment.
there you have it.
I love
You
it
heard
too.
it first.
Who was the first person who shared the news when you found out that you got that book deal?
I think it was, oh, I don't remember. It was either my friend Jessica, who was the one interviewing me last night for the launch, or it was my bestie Natasha, who I dedicated the book to. Because Jessica was holding my hand throughout the entire like submission process because she's been there a few times. She's also with Catapult, so she knows the process. And Natasha has just been somebody who's been rooting for me since day one, and has been like, okay, can we hurry up and get this book published now? I'm tired of waiting for you. But I kind of wanted to share the news with her so that she would be like, so she could stop waiting and stop hounding me for this. I'm like, see, it's here now, so can you please just lay off? So it was either one of those two people.
So as I read at the top of the hour, that you did some stand-up comedy. How did that come about for you? How long did that journey last? Are you still on that journey? I feel like we're on it in this interview, but tell us more.
Sure. So I started doing stand-up comedy when I was living in Melbourne, in Australia. And that has a really massive stand-up comedy scene and culture. So a lot of famous Australian actors who have gone on to be like really serious dramatic performers started out as stand-up comedians. And the most immediate person who comes to mind is Eric Bana. He was doing this kind of sketch comedy bit before he got picked up and did this role for Chopper Read, who is one of Australia's most infamous criminals. And before that, he was just kind of a funny man. And I thought at the time that I might want to go a similar route because I thought I'm pretty funny. I'm not so sure how serious I am, but I also felt like it would be really useful in informing my writing. Because I'm somebody who's naturally very verbose in terms of when I write. I want all the words. I want all the sentences. I want all the beauty. I feel like if I get more detailed, I can just keep going. Like I can unlock the hidden secret of a word or a phrase or a sentence. And I felt like that's not something that works in comedy because you lose an audience very, very quickly. So I felt like that would teach me how to turn a beautiful phrase with a devastating result in a shorter period of time. And it was on my birthday, actually, in 2015 or 16, when I got up at a comedy workshop in Melbourne, in North Melbourne, for the first time and did like 2 minutes of jokes in front of an audience of comedians, which is the worst audience you can perform comedy for, because they're not looking to laugh, they're looking to tear you apart.
Oh yeah, forever judging.
And it was all like male comedians as well. So it was me and like 2 other women in the entire room. And I got up there, and rather than laughing, I think I got like 1 or 2 illicit chuckles, like, huh. And I felt like, okay, that is probably the most successful result I could have hoped to have. And then after that, I was really surprised that several of them ran like pretty prominent comedy rooms in the city, and they reached out to me and they asked me if I want to perform for 5 minutes at their room. So that's how it all started, and I just kept going from there. And now it's, when I started writing fiction more seriously after I moved here, I kept up comedy for a while because it was also an entry point into Germany. It was an entry point into having a social life and meeting people and having friends and things like that. But at some point I had to like Sophie's Choice that situation, because I had to work during the day and I had to figure out what I wanted to do by night, and I couldn't do comedy and writing at the same time. So I chose to pursue writing, and comedy is now something I do in my writing and in my social engagements with the homies.
Yeah. So congratulations on the debut. How has it been, the past month since the release of your book?
It's been absolutely wild. I didn't know what to expect. I had hopes, but I think there's just something really weird and bizarre about working on something for years at a time, and then all of a sudden you're told you can't work on it anymore. Like, okay, here's a deadline. It's out into the world now. Nope, you can't touch it. You can't critique it. There's nothing that can be changed now. It's in people's hands. And I'm thinking, ooh, but can I just change one more thing? And of course not. I can't. It's impossible. So I think reckoning with the fact that it's a finished product now has just been really weird for me personally. But also, it's just really strange to see people reading it and people engaging with it. Strange in a beautiful way, in a wonderful way. But I guess I just wasn't prepared for seeing other people engaging with it and having their own opinions on it and interpreting it in ways that I have no control over. So that takes a little bit of bracing of oneself, but it's been incredible. And I am also incredibly happy with how my community has really rallied behind me with this. Like last night at the launch, there were people there who'd been there since the beginning, since it was just a twinkle in my eye, this whole idea. And for them to like witness the entire cycle and this completion point feels like a very formative moment in my career and in my life. So yeah.
Will you give us our listeners the origin story of how and why of this novel?
Yes, I will. So the origins of the story comes from actually a term that everybody is very familiar with, and I'm sure the two of you are very familiar with as well. It's person of color. So I started with the very simple phrase that I use every single day, pretty much, and that is so familiar to me and so familiar to everyone around me. And I decided to just kind of problematize it because I felt like it taps in so much into like our social psychology in terms of how we view ourselves and how we view each other. And it just seems strange to me how the term is called a person of color and how it's become so incorporated into the everyday usage of our mundane lives that when it actually is a kind of a strange term. because, we're technically, let me be very clear about this, we're all technically people of color. And I don't mean to say that people who are white are in the same category as that, because that would be inherently anti-Black for me to say that. I mean that most people are of a specific color.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's a phrase that's applied predominantly to people of the global majority, people from Asia, Africa, South America, and Pacific Islander and Caribbean, people like that. So I decided to kind of examine its connotations, its historical significance. I wanted to really unpack what the term meant and problematize it and kind of turn it around itself to make it weird. I really wanted to make it bizarre and strange, because the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed to me. And I thought, well, let me revisit a lot of the literature on passing. But then I thought, well, there actually isn't a lot. This was pre-Vanishing Half with Britt Bennett in 2020. And the few books I had read were by people like Octavia Butler and the guy who wrote gosh, it's slipping my head. It's a satirical novel from the 1930s. It's a guy who builds a kind of time machine to change Black people white.
Mm.
And it's really satirical in the sense that it actually pokes fun at prominent figures like W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's called Black No More. Black No More, that's the name of the book. And it creates a kind of existential crisis among Southern white people, where if they have no more Black people to lynch, then they build a machine of themselves to turn themselves Black so they have more people to oppress. And it's really weird and strange and kind of brilliant in a very interesting way. And I thought, well, these books, which I love, deal with subjects of Black and white. What about other colors? What about other hues? And so to look at that, I looked at a lot of visual art, people who had kind of interrogated that theme before, people like Carrie Mae Weems, who in her retrospective at the Guggenheim almost 10 years ago, I think, she did a series of photographs called Colored People, which were images of Black children with colored tints over their faces, like magenta and teal and things like that. And her whole point was she wanted to show that the color Black was actually the absorption of all colors in paint. Like, it's very dynamic, it's very versatile, it's all encompassing, and it's much more vibrant than it's often depicted. And that, I think, was really what sparked it for me. And then the catalyst to get me to kind of put it into words was our friend Rachel Dolezal, who you know.
Yes, we do. Doing the most. The definition of doing the most.
She stays doing the most too. Like, she's out here braiding hair, painting Black portraits. I'm like, look, if she can do that, I can write a book about a woman of color who can change the color of her skin. And then it just kind of took off from there.
And it is truly an amazing read with that concept wrapped into the book. But I want to talk about the layout of the book before we dive into the story even further. And one of the things that I thought was kind of cool, and I would like for you to talk more about it, was that each section of your book starts with a chord, and then there's like a line that you've written under there. Is there any significance to the chords that you have throughout this book?
Yeah, so each section is named. So the book is structured after Mahler's Third Symphony, Gustav Mahler's Third Symphony. So each section represents one of the 6 movements in that symphony from beginning to end. And I used his symphony to kind of structure the book because I wanted it to be like a piece of music itself, in terms of having peaks and crescendos, having moments of kind of loud violence and moments of really soft tenderness. And I wanted it to be a piece that left you feeling kind of reconciled without necessarily being overly sentimental. I didn't want to have an overly sentimental ending, because I get the whole love as liberation thing is something that people might find kind of trite or overdone. But even though that is one of the majority themes of the book, I didn't want it to feel entirely gratifying. I wanted to kind of leave people wanting more. And when I thought about pieces of music to use as a kind of basis for inspiration, I thought of that piece, because it does that so expertly, especially when enjoyed live. So I was very informed by Mahler during the writing of this piece. I was very informed by his use of polyphony and all those other things I spoke about in there. I was really informed by also his personal struggle as a Jewish, Bohemian, Czech, German composer whose work was heavily censored under the Nazi regime. So I felt like his experience kind of mirrored a little bit of what Gabrielle was going through in her own sense, that sort of all-encompassing danger, that sense of threat from every direction. And I felt like, you know, the two pieces were kind of conversing with each other through time. And I really enjoyed that kind of idea.
Thank you for this segue, because my next question is that your book is has debuted at a time where queer writers and their books are met with resistance and book bans, especially here in the United States. And you've, as we talked about earlier, you also released your book in Germany as of yesterday. What has this moment been for you since the release? And what is it that you desire for the conversation to center around with discussing your novel and the place that it now holds here in the world of literature?
Honestly, it's just such an infuriating time to be a human being, but specifically a queer woman of color, especially one from Florida, which seems to be leading the way in terms of how quickly we can plunge the West back into a sphere of darkness. I really try to think about what place my book would have in the grander conversation of things in time, like with perspective. And the only thing I can hope is that booksellers and librarians continue to have the means to make books like mine and so many others accessible without fear of repercussions or political retribution. And people might think that that is a much further possibility than it really is, but I see it happening right before my eyes. And I'm sure the two of you see it too. And in my acknowledgement section, I mentioned that briefly about how I feel like booksellers and people in literature are really quite brave for bringing this literature to people who need it the most at a time when the state and the country are being run by literal monsters. So I think the most important thing is for writers to keep writing things like this. And I certainly will. Consequences be damned. But I can't help but shake the fear of, you know, at some point, do people get worn down? At some point, do people get beaten down? And maybe that's just like the distance. Like, I'm over here, I'm not there, I'm not seeing this conversation every single day. But I also, because I live in Germany and because I'm very familiar with the history of like book burning and book banning here in Germany, I can't help but notice a lot of the parallels. And that makes me feel, I don't want to say less hopeful, but it makes me deeply concerned for the direction that the United States in particular is heading in. And I mean, I am all for revolution. I am all for political demonstrating and all of that. But I also know what people like that would be going up against in America in a heavily militarized, heavily policed state. And, you know, it's something I wake up with a concern almost every single day. And yesterday was the 4th of July, which I don't even know what that means to me.
Same.
And my friends actually at the launch, they celebrated by getting me an effigy of Ron DeSantis to burn. So that is where my heart is right now.
So 3 things. first of all, when you talked about the music, if the people are reading the book, there's a whole like playlist of stuff that they can listen to after the book, that they can just dive into the world of the book and more.
Does it move along with the story, or is like, this is the list that I was listening to and I wrote this
we
book?
love a good playlist. We love a good playlist. We respect the time and the effort for that playlist to be made.
Well, I mean, I think so. Okay, those were the jams I was listening to when I was like seriously tearing my hair out about writing this book. Like when I was having issues with like plot holes and character development, and I needed to take a break and I needed to walk around the park, I saved my document, I left the house, and I walked around the park listening to those jams and going over the problems in my mind over and over and over again. And there would be moments where, like, actually, let me give you an example. Like when I decided to take a certain character out of rotation in the book, I think I was listening specifically to SZA. Oh no, I was listening to Summer Walker. I was listening to her, like her song about like killing her man or something. I was like, that's kind of brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? So if you want to like get into the headspace of the book, I'd recommend listening to a lot of the classical music that is like described in the story. If you want to get into my headspace, and God help you if that's what you want, in terms of how to write the book and how to like make certain difficult choices, then that soundtrack is definitely what I would recommend starting with.
Okay. So my number 2 from what you said is the resistance and like people getting tired. We're gonna be honest with you. Sometimes when we would pick books, like I know Veronica can share this sentiment. I'm like, we are not reading another slave story. We are not reading another book like that's centered just on food. Because we're just like, we are more than that, and we are, like the themes and all of the stuff. There's more to it than that. So, like just fighting for it and like just wanting more, like having conversations like this kind of fulfills the need of that part of us that are missing. Like this is what keeps us going. And, like, even though you're far away, we thank you for like engaging, because it's important for us to be able to, weekly having these conversations, and like we are not crazy thinking about this. Like there are people that also think like us and value the same things like you do. And speaking of, the third thing is Florida. We are also based in Florida.
I saw one of you was in Florida. I didn't know both of you were in Florida.
Yes.
Yeah, we're in Orlando area.
Oh, honey. Oh. Are y'all okay?
I don't know. Honestly, I truly don't know, because Orange County Public System just banned 2 of Toni Morrison's books, Color Purple, 3 William Shakespeare plays. Like they're doing the most right now.
And Alice Walker, you said.
Yeah, Alice Walker did Color Purple, and the Toni Morrisons are the like Beloved, and I think Paradise, and like we are struggling here. So, when I asked you that question about like, where you see your book as a queer writer, and, and all of this space in between and all of these things that are happening, this is a question I've asked before to other people who've debuted a book, and they'll say things like, oh, it's just, it's still early. I don't know where this falls in line, but I feel like there's this sense of urgency where you kind of need to know. And so the way that you answered the question is like, this is how I want this question to be answered. Because it's that sense of urgency to understand, yeah, my book may have come out yesterday, but I understand the importance of it today and for tomorrow and yesterday and all of that in between. Yeah. So
like we said, Florida is a very complicated place to be at. Especially for people that look like us. Some people, you know, that have never lived here often misunderstand what it means to be here. And for the people that choose to stay here and why. How important was it that you placed your characters in this particular place?
I will never ever grow tired of talking about Florida in this book, ever. So obviously the book itself has elements of magical realism and just magic in general. Like I really ask a lot of people's imaginations when reading this book. And I wanted the story, it only made sense for me to put the story in a place that to me encompasses equal amounts of magic. And as somebody who was raised in Florida, all over Florida, so Tallahassee, Orlando, Tampa Bay area, and Clearwater, spent a lot of time in Miami, I've seen a lot of the state. And the way I describe it to people is that if the United States were a pond, then you know all the lily pads with like the dragonflies and like the hummingbirds would be like the lily pads floating on top. That's Maine. And at the bottom of, you know, like the plastic beer can rings, the used condoms, the reticulated pythons, the alligators, the chupacabras, that's Florida. You know, it has some of the most beautiful ecology, some of the most stunning natural diversity anywhere in the world that I've seen, and I've been almost everywhere. It also has some of the most interesting people you'll meet anywhere. And the state is run by literal monsters. So it is like an actual kind of fairy tale, an actual kind of mythology made real. One that gets wiped clean almost every hurricane season by this torrential downpour that comes in off the coast of West Africa that kind of acts like it's like an act of God that forces people to start over all over again, but they do it, you know, they're like fiercely protective of not leaving, you know, during this life-threatening situation. You know, I try to describe to people, Category 5 storm rolls in, people don't leave. What they do is they have hurricane parties, and they set rafts down the street to float and surf with the alligators right beside them. We are a unique brand of human being.
Oh. But what's that song? Stand by your man. Like that's me. You know, like the struggle is real here in Florida, but it's mine and I gotta stick beside it. But to let people know, like it might be ran by this fascist man that's sitting up in Tallahassee at this moment, but there are other things that are existing here that's keeping this state afloat, literally afloat, because we could be underwater soon.
And no, like, and I got so much respect for the two of you and a lot of other people I know who are determined to bring Florida out of the age of darkness. Like, you know, they're very adamant. I have a friend whose name I won't mention because he's quite political, but who is like a fierce advocate for the state. He says if Florida goes like the United States goes, because, you know, its diversity is really important to fighting climate change. And he's going head to head with some of the worst people in the world. And I feel like that's not something that people can shy away from, especially writers. I just don't feel like that is a luxury that we have. And it's not something I think anybody should take lightly. And I do feel like there's a kind of existential threat here that we need to actually call out if it's ever going to change. So my hat's off to both of you for that, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Notes on Her Color is a story that looks at many things from colorism to sexuality, but one of the major themes that stands out the most is that of the familial relationship between Gabrielle and her mother. The mother-daughter dynamic has always been a place of focus within literature. How did you want to explore this relationship with the use of the magical realism of them being able to change the color of their skin?
Yeah, well, I've always seen the mother-daughter relationship as being perhaps the most intimate relationship that can exist anywhere. And I think it was in 2016, I read this essay in the Journal of Neuroscience that said that relationship is more heavily bonded than even like a mother's relationship with her son, because a mother and daughter share the same parts of the brain that experience empathy. Like those same parts of the brain are the same in a mother and a daughter, which I think was a pretty new piece of information that really stuck with me. And I think of that relationship as being, full of love, full of challenges, full of different phases of life, full of political and social pressures and influences. I also see it as a relationship that has certain elements of violence that are inherently a part of it. And two of those would be the act of giving birth itself, which is, a very violent and in some parts self-consuming act for a woman to undergo, or a birthing person to undergo. And then I think of the act of self-actualization that a child has later, where after the mother has given them like her blood, her value system, her beliefs, her maybe part of her health, because pregnancy is a potentially life-threatening condition, then a child, or a daughter specifically, can choose to reject that in order to become the person that they need to be to exist in the body that they have. And I felt like that was also very violent, particularly towards a mother. And knowing that, I didn't think there was any particular way for me to write this relationship without making it complicated. To me, it felt more realistic to have a protagonist who could change the color of her skin than it was to have a simple one-dimensional mother-daughter relationship. And the color changing element was really the device that I used to demonstrate how close they were with one another, which you see in the beginning of the book when Gabrielle is in this kind of womb-like embrace with her mother in bed, and it feels so intimate. Like they share a kind of mind, they share feelings, they share like thoughts and fears of this, paternal figure in their household. And the reason why I'm using this to kind of bring them together is because our concepts of race and our concepts of how we see ourselves within that social construct are informed by what our parents teach us.
Right.
So everything we know about that first comes introduced from them. Like if a father has a talk with his son about the police, or a mother has a talk with her daughter about, not appearing too hostile in the company of white students or peers or whatever. And I felt like this was a very exciting way to kind of revisit that conversation in terms of where Gabrielle sees herself in the pecking order of her social environment. And I felt like by using this device, I was actually able to have a more honest conversation about all the implications of race and racism, rather than working strictly within a kind of realistic literary fiction genre. I felt like I was able to expose a lot more of the absurdities of that construct by using that device, and really calling out a lot of our personal perceptions that we just accepted as being, part of life, by highlighting it in this book. The way I talk about whiteness and blackness, and the way I use colors to talk about things like passion and anger, and making it very plain to people in that way. I just decided to take it extremely literally. And when I did that, it just kind of came about as something that was even more absurd.
It's very direct, and it kind of hits you in your face.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, see, now you see it. If like if somebody would deny that, oh, I don't really see it, I don't really feel it, like they need to read your book and be like, now you know.
Oh, like I don't see color. Well, now you do.
Yeah.
You can't help but see it. Goodness, if there was somebody who could actually do that, like to change your skin. But the idea of the self-actualization part, it being violent, and it's like I never even thought about that in a way of like, it's almost as if your mother is having to go ahead and do another rebirth of a child, of someone that they didn't know they were going to birth into this world. And it's just kind of like, who is this? I don't recognize this anymore. And I also feel like there might be another coming back around to that rebirth thing, that might be, hopefully for some, it might not happen for most, where when you become older and sometimes you see what your parents were seeing, and you're like, oh, I see what they were saying with this. Or, sometimes it's the opposite end, where you're like, oh, I see where they missed it with this. And it could be either the rebirthing of yourself, or the rebirthing of that relationship with that parent. So it can go into those other ways.
Or when you like me, like I am one of 3 daughters, so my mom had to do it 3 times with 3 girls. And then now that I have my child of my own, I feel like, she has closed a cycle with me. But like you said, unless like you have a daughter also, like that also not stayed in my head, because like, yeah, me and my son, we're like, oh, well, we're one person because he's 3. But like I remember being young and being attached to my mom, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. And I think like for a mom, it must be really just so difficult to see like this person who you've given everything that you feel like is useful in the world, and to kind of pick and choose what doesn't fit for them anymore. And I feel like when a mother kind of steps away from being a mom, or she says like, oh, my kids are grown up, now I'm going to rediscover myself, I feel like that's something that's much more celebrated, because I think just in the Western mentality, we think of like honor thy elders and like let them do what they need to do, and oh, they did the best that they can, they're still your parents, forgive them, whatever. I feel like it's much more violent psychologically when a child rejects that. Yes. And it takes a lot more to do that, because it's just not as socially acceptable. And it also requires kind of cutting off a piece of yourself. That feels a little bit less natural, but the reason why I chose that is because it also felt more heartbreaking in the moment.
But also sometimes very necessary.
Yeah, you got
for sure.
Sometimes you got to prune the tree, in order to continue to grow, right? So sometimes you got to let go. If it ain't working, it ain't working. Even if I came from you, it might not be working. So you've created this world where Gabrielle lives in it feels like she lives in this like never ending state of secrets, keeping secrets at home, at school, and keeping those secrets internally. Walk us through having her to hold these secrets, even those that had nothing to do with her, like the ones at school, and those secrets that she was passing along in those notes with the students.
That's a great question. Yeah, so the story takes place between 1994 and 1995. So this is pre-social media. This is pre like massive proliferation of the internet, when I feel like it was just a lot easier to have secrets. Yes.
No evidence.
Like nobody tagging you on the night when you were supposed to be somewhere else, and like people seeing that you were actually at the place that you said you weren't going to be, I really miss that. So I feel like in part I use secrets in part to date the book, to kind of give you a sense of this takes place during a time when a lot of our present day concerns just weren't as relevant. But I also do it to kind of highlight her nature. She keeps so many secrets about her own home. I think that I needed to create this sort of silo of insularity to really give you an idea of just how closed off she was from everybody at the beginning of the story. And her ability to keep secrets, I think it's just part and parcel for that. Like, to me, it was very important not to disrupt this kind of illusion of magic that runs throughout the book. And in order to do that, I had to make the reader a little bit claustrophobic. So secrets was a big part of that, keeping people wondering how much other people knew or how much other people could see. And I needed that to be a deeply significant part of her personality. so that when I kind of open her up and she starts experiencing love and friendship for the first time, it feels almost like a relief to the reader. Like, thank God this White House isn't the end of everything.
That's so funny that you mentioned being claustrophobic,
Yeah.
because that was, it's like literally the next question that we have. Like we were asking you about like how, you know, can you talk to us about the autonomy that Gabrielle has, and like, you know, that she doesn't have any autonomy at the house, like with her mother, like father or mother, and then like, you know, no, like she's bound to the decisions and rules, like with her self-identity, self-expression, and self-worth. So like,
Yeah.
you know, when you were talking about being claustrophobic, like, and the relief after that, it makes all the more sense that, you know, you've maintained that, you said that magic that you wanted for readers to have, like it's that like sense of release after she finds this very special person in her life that opens up these avenues that she didn't even think that she had.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. I needed her genesis to be so completely different from the place that she was going so that you could see the journey along the way. And in order to do that, I had to make her genesis a kind of place that needed to be escaped, void of color, void of spice and flavor, void of closeness and genuine acceptance. Like there's this constant sense of threat coming from all directions that is really visceral in the beginning, and as you kind of strip that away, then you give her the opportunity and the tools to liberate herself simply by means of exposure. And I think I was trying to make the point that these things, if there is a solution to being closed off from the world, it is simply exposure. And thankfully, there's this incredibly cool, charismatic, sexy character to help her do that.
Ijima Oluwo has a quote in her book, So You Want to Talk About Race, where she says that white supremacy is the nation's oldest pyramid scheme. And as we know, it is a pyramid scheme that Black people have been forced to pay into every day. What we see in your book is a father who demands that his wife and child stay in a constant state of whiteness while they are at home together. Was this his way of seeking to control people who can reflect the very thing that was a constant reminder of said pyramid scheme that he has had to deal with outside of his home?
That's a great way to refer to it, a pyramid scheme, because the character Robert is a hyper-capitalist, and pyramid schemes would be kind of his jam if he existed in real life. And when I think of people in real life who are similar to him, I think the first person that comes to mind is Clarence Thomas.
I have been doing a deep dive in this man. I just finished watching the PBS, but I digress. I'm gonna let you go ahead and finish because I
dive.
Yes, that resonates so
much. Talk about the ultimate pyramid scheme. Like I mentioned his name last night at the launch, and there was this collective groan from the room, and I was like, It was like what y'all just did, but amplified by like 100 people.
Surround sound.
Yes.
So, I mean, I tell people it was really awful writing that character, and it was, but it was also a lot of fun to highlight just how awful people like that are, and the havoc they wreak on the people around them, because it needs to be like, you mentioned pyramid scheme. I'm thinking of like a cult.
Yes.
You need to spread that message to 2 or 3 other people in order to consider yourself a successful member of the organization.
Correct.
Like, it can't just stop with you. You have to spread that message of self-hate, of hypercapitalism and policing, and just general anti-progression to everyone else you know. You have to inflict it upon them like a disease. And I feel like that is exactly what Robert is doing in this story. He has develops such an intense level of self-loathing that it cannot exist within a vacuum anymore, because who he is basically gone. So he preys on other people. He preys on the people closest to him, which is his wife and his daughter. And without them, like, what does he have left to eat away at?
Right.
Basically.
Right.
And in that sense, he is not just the story's villain, obviously, but he is the hurdle, the obstacle that they have to overcome. And at the same time, he is kind of a real life manifestation of Tallulah's character, because Tallulah can change the color of her skin, but Robert cannot.
Yes.
So he adopts all of the same mannerisms, the behaviors, the terminology, the language, the vernacular, the profession that is expected of him in order to gain proximity to whiteness, which he does successfully.
Right.
And that was a representation of, people we know like that in real life.
Yes.
People in the Supreme Court, people in the House of Representatives and the Senate. People maybe you're related to, people you've gone to school with. That person is real.
Yes.
And I needed to put them in conversation with one another, so that even if people could say, oh, well, somebody like Tallulah couldn't possibly exist because nobody can change the color of their skin, I did not want them to look away from Robert and say, like, a person like that doesn't exist, because people like that exist everywhere. So I wanted to confront people with that.
And she did that, y'all. If you haven't read this book, you need to go and read it so you can see what she did.
I have no words for Robert. Robert lives in my nightmares. So, but I bet it was like challenging, but also, like you said, a fun way to, like, tackle a real person like that. Speaking of Tallulah, if this is the part of the book that we ask permission, if the readers would kind of pause and come back. If you haven't read the full story, you can come back in a little bit. It only takes like a day to read this book, y'all. You can do it. So we're gonna talk about when Tallulah comes home from being away. We'll just say that if you're hard-headed and you don't want to pause. And as Gabrielle said in the book, in the past, she wanted her father to be gone, so she and her mom could have some time together. It gave a sense of dread to me when one safe person is not the same anymore. As a writer, or as the author of this novel, when and how did you decide that it was necessary for that transitory period in Gabrielle's life for that story to continue?
Well, I actually really wrestled with that for quite some time. So this is one of the beauties of having a draft that ends up in people's hands versus the many drafts you work through on the way to that. Because I wasn't always certain how that relationship would play out in the end. I think I knew that I needed Gabrielle to get away. I just didn't know how. So at first, and I don't think this is a spoiler because this is not in the book. At first I had Tallulah die. And that I thought would be an easier way to facilitate Gabrielle to leave, because then the only person she'd have to deal with was this horrible man, who was very easy to leave, But I didn't feel like that did enough service to the bond that they had with each other. And I also just loved her too much. She was all over the place, and she was very complicated, and she was in this relationship, in this marriage with this horrible man. But there was also genuine love and genuine compassion and genuine artistry in how they communicated with one another. And I felt like the only way to properly break that relationship apart would be for her to have a kind of psychological break. It would need to be something so severe that she would almost become a different person. So then it would be easier for Gabrielle to leave, because then she wouldn't be able to recognize the person that she was once so close to. And I also felt like that was a way to honor Tallulah's role in in the kind of terror that Gabrielle faced
Mm.
in this dynamic, because she's a powerful, strong, complicated, complex person, figure, character. And yet she's chosen to be in this marriage with this person.
Mm.
And she's chosen to stay there. She didn't run away. I didn't make her run away in this story. And I think I wanted to show that in her decision to kind of stick around, that she had kind of lost a piece of herself. Which is what happens, presumably, if you stay in a dynamic like that for so long with somebody who hates themselves. Like, you too compromise a piece of yourself. You too are affected by that. And I didn't feel like it would be realistic for me to have this story without showing somehow that she had agency there. So her challenges with her mental health, I think, are representative of the pieces of herself that she had abdicated along the way. And that manifested around the same time that Gabrielle became more independent and began seeking out more change and more love. And that helped facilitate the kind of radical break in their relationship. Because as Gabrielle becomes more independent and more self-aware, Tallulah is kind of losing a bit of that. And it shows how that dynamic between mothers and daughters can often come at play when you lose a so-called extension of yourself. It can kind of be like losing sense of who you are entirely.
But how pivotal was it when Gabrielle found, home and comfort in Dom and Dom's mother and like their extended family? Because to me, that was like the wind, that was like the air. Basically, that was my safe space.
Yeah. I wanted to be at that Christmas party.
Yeah. I want to be in that birthday,
everything.
What y'all
say? Wasn't it just so sexy? Honestly, it was exactly like what you just described. It was like a breath of fresh air. It was like opening a window in a stale room and getting that cool ocean breeze just kind of wrapping around you. It was a huge relief, and I felt myself at times kind of exhaling, like deeply, like, thank goodness.
Right.
She can also have this as well.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, we are at the part of our conversation that we like to ask of everyone who comes on the show. We want to know your top 5 favorite books of all time, or the top 5 things that you're most excited about. So that could be any books that you're reading, anything that you're watching, anything that you're eating, places that you've been, whatever those top 5. We want to give you a chance, because sometimes when we give the top 5 of all time, people kind of like, what? So, it's up to you to choose what you want to talk about.
Any form of media.
Okay. Well, you asked me, and I kind of knew this was coming, but my top 5 of anything would definitely be like, sorry, I'm one of those. So I will list a 5 greats, but it depends on my mood if they're top 5 or not. But they're definitely up there. So with Florida on my mind, it's definitely Beloved by Toni Morrison. Formative, life-changing, and creatively life-altering. I would also add Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, who just passed, because he taught me how to think critically about violence on the written page. After that, it's kind of a wash of a bunch of people. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller for satire. Everything by Jamaica Kincaid ever written. I'm gonna go into spices now. Definitely lemon pepper seasoning, definitely seasoned salt, definitely Lowry's.
Shout out to Lowry's.
Definitely Frank's hot sauce, definitely Mike's hot honey, and not just because I had it on an omelet earlier today. Trader Joe's for the win. And Okay, music. Shout out to Tina Turner. May she forever rest in peace. Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, Charlie Mingus, Deftones, forever, and Fiona Apple and Tori Amos. And there you go.
And there you have it.
A solid list.
That's a solid list. Even if it changes when you get off of this Zoom call, I think that's a good list for
a lot
people
of
to
choices.
a lot of flavors.
Yeah.
Shout out to JR Cricket's lemon pepper wet with the blue cheese dressing.
Oh, now I'm hungry.
Yes.
But yes, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing this space with us. This book, I really hope that it flies off all of the bookshelves, be it in the bookstores or in the library, wherever people find their literature
Digitally.
Yeah, congratulations. You've done something remarkable. You've written a book and you put it out in the world, and everyone is here to read it. So congratulations to you. And
thank you for coming to the podcast. Thank you for the time and the effort. We truly appreciate it. And the next time you visit here, let us know. We can do like a little food tour with you, because I feel like it would be it would be yummy.
Yes.
And flavorful.
Not bland or unseasoned at all. Thank you.
Not at all. Not with us. Not with us. Until we meet again, you take care of yourself, okay?
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciated this conversation. It's been great.
We hope you enjoyed our show.
Our show has been produced and edited by Preston Long. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast.
Our theme song you've been nodding your head to is by Sean Kantrowitz. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Dammit. That's SeanDammit.
Follow us on Instagram at The Vulgar Geniuses.
Bye!